We're fearlessly talking about the biggest stories that matter to you the most. Breaking news, John Calipari is finalizing a 5-year deal to become the Arkansas Razorbacks' next head coach, covering college sports like no one else. The biggest guests in sports. We now welcome in Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun.
Such a pride I had, I came to Connecticut.
The legend, Tim Tebow, joins us.
We'll run it back. I like it.
The legend, Herschel Walker. Welcome in, everybody. Tuesday afternoon edition, Air Torres Sports Podcast. I am your host, Air Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a great day. You know, it was a little bit of a quiet Monday night in the world of college sports, but you know what? We are going to rock and roll anyway because we got a lot to talk about here on today's show. So first of all, obviously, look, the big story from the weekend, Arkansas beats Kentucky, all that good stuff. We talked about the game on Sunday, but kind of the conversation is, can Arkansas actually build some momentum off this? Well, I am here to tell you that there are some stats out there that are pretty reflective that if Arkansas can just be pretty good, not great, pretty good over the next 2 months, 5 weeks, whatever it is in the lead up to Selection Sunday, Arkansas should be in the NCAA tournament. So we'll discuss that. From there, interesting news. Changes on the way at North Carolina, but not what you think. Hubert Davis with some interesting comments on Monday night. And then we will preview what is a monster college hoops Tuesday night. No, the games are starting soon, so, we're not going to have a ton of time to react to all of everything. But we will, I will say, we will react to everything on Wednesday morning. But tonight we will preview the games later this evening. Ole Miss hosting Kentucky, Marquette at St. Johns, one of the biggest matchups in recent history for the Johnnies. And, of course, the late one, stay up late, 11 p.m. Eastern tip-off, Arizona at BYU. Loaded show, fun show. Before we get started, a couple quick reminders. One, make sure that you are subscribed to the Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel. New clips, new videos going up every single day, so make sure that you are subscribed. Also, make sure you're subscribed on all of the podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, etc., because man, oh man, are we pumping out a lot of content. Speaking of a lot of content, a lot of good stuff, terrible segue, but it's okay because you know what? You know who loves Torres, even with a terrible segue? Our friends, our partners. Torres is talking Collip Puffs and CollipPuffs.com. Okay, so listen, it's that time of year. March Madness is coming. By the way, if you want to be another great advertiser with the Aaron Torres Pod, you can reach out to me, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com. We're doing some really cool stuff in the lead up to March Madness, but right now is not the time to talk about that. Instead, we are here to talk about Collip Puffs and CollipPuffs.com. Okay. So I've told you their story. It's, first of all, remember, it's that time of year. It's February, New Year's resolutions, all that good stuff. You don't want to fall off the wagon yet. It's only February. Beach bod season is coming. You need to start eating healthier, being more responsible, but you also want to eat stuff that tastes good, don't you? Well, my friends, that's where Collip Puffs and CollipPuffs.com comes in. Told you the story, family-owned business. Joey, a huge football fan, Ram season ticket holder, was sitting on the couch one day, watching a game, looking for a healthy snack in the cupboard that he would like, that his kids would like. Wasn't really anything available, so he created Collip Puffs, okay? The idea being, I need something that I could snack on that is delicious, but also healthy as well, that I can send with my kids to school. Well, that's where he came up with Collip Puffs. Baked, not fried, avocado oil, no grease. But they taste delicious. And that's all you need to know. By the way, so many of you have reached out, said you tried them for yourselves. You believe Torres and what I've been telling you since we started working with Collip Puffs. But for those of you who have not tried them, now's the time. What are you waiting for? Visit ColliPuffs.com. That's CAULIPUFFS.com. ColliPuffs.com. You can also find them on Amazon, Amazon.com. You've probably heard of it. Well, guess what? You can find Collip Puffs there. Just search Collip Puffs, throw them in your cart with everything else, whatever else you're buying. You can find Collip Puffs on Amazon, throw them in your cart, try them for yourself. You're going to love them, okay? Thank you to Collip Puffs because, man, oh, man, it's been a fun ride with them. I can't wait to see them grow. They actually have a lot of very interesting things developing within the company. I don't want to spoil anything for them, but this is a shooting star rocket ship of a company, and it is a shooting star rocket ship of a snack. They're delicious. They're healthy. Try them for yourself, Collip Puffs and ColliPuffs.com. With that said, it is a busy Tuesday afternoon. There is no more time to waste. So let's get to the topic of the day. Topic of the day. Listen, Monday was a very quiet night in college hoops. Kansas beats Iowa State. I don't think that's like the sexiest story. You're at home. You're supposed to win that game. But what I want to do now is kind of look back, but also look ahead on the big story of the weekend, which was, of course, John Calipari going back to Rupp Arena with the Arkansas Razorbacks and beating the Kentucky Wildcats in his former arena, his team's former arena against his former team. They beat him 89-79 in what was obviously, it goes without saying, the signature win of the early John Calipari era at Arkansas, And so I bring it up because after the game, we talked a lot about it, what went right, all that good stuff. And then I think the conversation, we briefly touched on, can Arkansas make a run? And I think the one thing that I did say on Sunday, I said, listen, I'm not going to oversell it. I'm not saying that this team is going 10-0 in the final 10 games of the season. But if you can win at Kentucky, you can win just about any game left on your schedule. And any win in the SEC at this point is good because the computer metrics love this league because of what it did in the out-of-conference. And so we talked about it a little bit. But like I said, Monday was a little bit of a quieter day. And I thought it was interesting because I came across 2 or 3 very interesting things that basically, one, confirm exactly what I told you about 2.5 weeks ago. And 2, I think it really shows you that Arkansas being on the NCAA tournament bubble and potentially getting into the NCAA tournament, I know they're 13-8, but it is not as far-fetched as anyone could possibly imagine. And so let's get into some of the notes and analytics, because the analytics tell you Arkansas could very much play itself into tournament contention, okay? So first of all, let's go ahead and look at the simplest way to determine, is Arkansas a bubble team? Well, on Tuesday morning, as he does every week, a little guy called Joe Lunardi put out his most recent NCAA tournament projection, okay? We all know Joe Lunardi. He's great. He's actually been on the pod. He's awesome. Maybe I reach out to him, try to get him on the show. But I found it interesting that in his most recent projection, he has Arkansas in his next 4 out, okay? So what does next 4 out mean? Basically, essentially what it means is it's pretty simple. I think everybody knows, right? You have the group of 68 teams that is going to be in the NCAA tournament, the 68-team field. Then you have the first 4 out. Those are teams that are right on the cut line. Can they get over the hump? Then you have the next 4 out that, like, they're not in the tournament picture, but, all it takes is 1 or 2 wins, and you can be right back in. And so I thought it was interesting. They're in the next 4 out. And I think this really, to me, speaks to something that we talked about a few weeks ago, okay? Because, listen, let me even backtrack, okay? So 2-3 weeks ago, we did a segment on one of the Sunday shows. I vividly remember. It was after Arkansas lost to fall to 0-3 in SEC play, okay? And I'm trying to remember who it would have even been against. They lost to Tennessee, then they lost to Ole Miss. I'm blanking on who that third team was. It was obviously some sort of Saturday game that I don't know why I can't. Oh, it was Florida. They lost to Florida. It was ugly. And they lose to Florida at Bud Walton. And if you remember, we did a segment because one of these advanced analytics websites kind of came out and basically said, like, this is the projection for each team in the SEC in terms of what a bubble picture would look like and how realistic it is that they could get an at-large berth. And if you remember, we talked about it. It was like Alabama was like 99.7% that on January 12th or whatever day it was, they could get an at-large bid. Auburn was basically 100%. Kentucky was basically 100%. I think even like Texas A&M was like 99.2%. And so basically it had all these projections, and then it had Arkansas down at the bottom with it was like 9 to 10% chance of getting an at-large bid. And so I don't want to bore people with too many details, but I do think it's interesting because we talked about this at the time. And I said, listen, I'm not going to sit here and lie and say that Arkansas is playing the best basketball that I've ever seen in my life. But the notion that they only have a 10% chance to get an at-large bid, I said, is absolutely ridiculous. And at the time, the logic was pretty simple. The logic was, well, wait a second now. They play in the SEC, which is a double-edged sword. There's a lot of really good teams. It's hard. Nobody, unless your name is Auburn or maybe Alabama, is going to go on a 4, 5, 6 game winning streak in this league. It's just not going to happen. Everybody's struggling. Tennessee's great one night, then they're terrible another. Florida's great one night, then they're terrible another. Kentucky, Ole Miss, whoever. But what we talked about was that is both bad news and good news. You're not going to go on a 9-game win streak. It's just not going to happen. But the counter to that is every single win you get is basically pretty good in the eyes of the computers. And then conversely, even when you lose, it isn't crippling in the eyes of the computers as well. And so to use a very simple example, look at a place like North Carolina, okay? North Carolina is in a tough spot because not only are they 13-10, they play in this awful ACC, and it's a double-edged sword opposite of Arkansas, is that North Carolina plays a game every time they win, unless it's against Duke or maybe at Clemson this week, it basically does nothing to improve their resume. I'm sorry, beating Boston College at home, beating Cal, beating Stanford. These are not wins that move the needle with the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee in the NCAA Tournament computers. Conversely, if you take any loss, it's terrible if you're North Carolina, but Arkansas is kind of in the opposite situation. And what we talked about specifically at the time was pretty straightforward. Is that if you actually looked at Arkansas's resume, I hate boring people with the quad 1, quad 2, quad 3 stuff here in January and early February, but it is kind of worth noting. You looked at Arkansas' resume at the time, and you look now at Arkansas's resume. It's actually really not that bad. The 13-8 record is not pretty, but this isn't a team in the Mountain West that's 2-6 in league play. This isn't a team in the A10 and the A-Sun and the whatever. Basically, if there's one league you can afford to be 2-6, as long as you sort of turn things around, it's the SEC. And if you look at Arkansas's resume, here's what's important to note. They clearly don't have a lot of great wins. But why it matters, they have no bad losses right now, okay? That Oklahoma loss isn't great. It's right now a quad 2 loss. But at the same time, Oklahoma's playing great. They just won by 30 points against Vandy the other day. Oklahoma, they play Auburn tonight. I mean, that would certainly help Arkansas's resume. I don't think they're going to get the win. But Oklahoma, it's not a terrible loss, and every other loss is in quad 1. Those are great wins, or great losses, if such a thing exists. So there are no bad losses on the resume. And I think it's important to note there's no really bad losses, right? 0 quad 3, 0 quad 4 losses, which are just, they're losses that will kill your resume. There's a lot of teams that are on the bubble that do have those really, really bad losses that are going to sink their resumes all season long. You don't need to go far to find one, by the way. I'll give you a perfect example. Monday night, Pitt is an NCAA tournament bubble-ish type team. Well, they lose at home to Virginia, who's absolutely terrible. I think that's a quad 3, maybe a quad 4 loss. And that is the type of loss that is going to hinder their resume all season long. And that's a loss that could plummet them on Selection Sunday. And so you look at Arkansas, basically any win that they get going forward is really, really, really good. They have 10 regular season games left. And then really the only losses that could even be construed as sort of bad going forward with 10 games left, LSU at home, you got to win. South Carolina on the road, you got to win. Every other game, if you win it, it's great. And if you lose it, it is going to have no negative impact. So I never bought this notion that they were completely off the bubble, but at some point you got to win. And so that's where it kind of gets interesting, because to me, of course, as I type this, I have not looked at the comments yet. I'm sure they're on fire. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people say, well, yeah, it's great that you can, but Calipari's not going to win these games. Calipari stinks. He's the worst coach that's ever walked the face of the earth. To which I say, not really. And it's not just about what happened on Saturday. It's not just about, 8 years ago when he had this player or that team or made a Final Four or whatever. But the truth is, analytically, and kind of you look at the numbers, he's actually been a pretty good coach as a college basketball coach the last couple years in February. We talked consistently. We talked that day that they lost to Florida. I said, listen, you just got to survive into February, because Cal has actually been pretty good in the regular season in February into March. Now, again, I understand there's been tournament disappointments. We've talked about them enough. Oakland, St. Peter's, we know those losses, okay? There hasn't been enough success in the SEC tournament, which I think clearly frustrated Calipari's or Kentucky fans when Calipari was at Kentucky. But the fact is, in February, he's actually been pretty good. Producer Matt, pop up the tweet from Jackson Collier, who covers Arkansas for Rivals.com. I thought this was great from JC. I talk to JC all the time. I love him. He said, a lot gets made of Calipari's final years at Kentucky, but we've made it to February and Arkansas needs wins. How has Cal fared in February, even in his quote-unquote down years? 8-1 in 2020, 2019, 2020, 3-4 in 2021, 2020, 2021, 6-4 in the 2022 season, 5-2 in 2023, 5-3 in 2024, 1-0 in 2025. And so you do the math over the course of that period. He's 28-12 over the final month of the regular season, or when in February as the coach of Kentucky over the last 5 years. Okay. But what I will also say is this. So 2019, 2020, great team. Could have made the NCAA, could have made the Final Four. That was Tyrese Maxey, Emmanuel Quickly. Okay. Let's take out 2021. 2021 was a weird year for everybody. That was the COVID bubble year. The whole season was in a bubble. No fans basically anywhere. If it was 10, 20% capacity. Okay. That was a year, by the way. Kentucky missed the tournament, but so did Duke. It was the only first-round loss of Roy Williams' career. It was just a strange season. I go back to what I talked about at the time, but everybody was miserable that year, okay? So I'm not going to criticize Calipari, a team full of freshmen. Nobody wants to be. It was a miserable year for everybody. That was the year Baylor and Gonzaga played in the championship. I could tell you, Gonzaga was undefeated. I know people on that staff that were miserable, that were like, I can't do this. This is awful. The only reason we're having success is because we got a bunch of old guys that get it, but this is terrible. And so I'm not going to criticize Calipari for what he did in 2021. Producer Matt, pop that up again really quick, okay? So after 2021, 6-2, 5-2, and then last year 5-3. And you sit there and say, well, 5-3 wouldn't be good enough, this and that. Well, here's the interesting thing, because I actually did reach out to Jackson about this. He only referenced February games and not regular season games that were played in March. So we all know the regular season ends the first full weekend of March, sometimes a little bit later, and then conference tournament starts, NCAA tournament, whatever. And so I bring it up because, yes, Calipari, quote unquote, only went 5-3 last year in February. Well, guess what? They played 3 regular season games in March, and Kentucky went 3-0. Kentucky went 3-0 in March last year, including, by the way, it is worth noting, a win at Tennessee, which was the SEC regular season champion. They also, ironically, beat Arkansas at home, and they beat Vandy at home as well. But really, they went 3-0 last year. So really, if you go from February 1 till the end of the regular season, they were 8-3. And really, so again, if you look at just the last 3 years, that's 16-5 over the last 3. But if you include March regular season games, I know I'm getting in the weeds, but Cal actually went 6-1 in March regular season games as well. So 6-1 plus whatever it was, 16 and I think 7 is what I said. Well, guess what? That is a 22-8 record after February 1st over the last 3 seasons, the down years for Calipari. 22-8 in February and March in a very tough SEC is not a bad record. And I'll tell you what, obviously I'm not great at math, but that comes out to about a 66% win percentage. I hate to spoil it for all the Calipari haters. If Arkansas goes wins 66% of its games at this season from here on forward, they're going to make the NCAA tournament. Okay. So right now, Arkansas, as I said, 13-8 right now in the regular season. Not great. A lot of work to do. I'm not saying they're going to go on a run, but the counter to that is that if they win 66% of their games, they got 10 games left in the regular season. They've played 21 games. They finished with 31. If they go 6-4 over their final 10 games, which is about 66%, I'm even going down a little bit, that is going to be a 19-12 regular season record. In the SEC, where you're not going to have any bad losses and several quad 1 wins, that is going to get them in the NCAA tournament. Now, it might be a 9 seed, it might be a 10 seed, it might be an 11 seed based on who they lose to and who they beat. And that is under the assumption that Cal only stays at the level that he has been at the last 3 years in February and March. That also doesn't factor in, by the way, what if he wins a game or 2 in the SEC tournament? So listen, I'm not going to go on and on because the bottom line is it still does matter that you got to keep winning games. And I don't want to overreact after one game. It is just 1 loss, 1 win against Kentucky. And if you lose to Texas on Wednesday, it starts this whole cycle over again of, it was a one-off deal. It was blah, blah, blah. It was this and that. But I will say the history tells us, and I've said this all along. I've said, listen, you can criticize Cal for the NCAA tournament struggles during his time at Kentucky those last 2 or 3 years. But the regular seasons have been great. That's what John Neighbors said on this show last week. He said, we thought we were getting to Cal that would go 13-5 in the SEC. That's clearly not in play. But I'm just here to tell you, there's winnable games left on this schedule. At Texas is a really good team. I don't want to dismiss what Texas does, but people have gone into Texas and won there this season. You go on and on down the list. Obviously, you got some tough ones ahead. And listen, I'm not going to say you're going to beat Alabama next week. I'm not going to say you're going to beat Auburn later. But South Carolina is still on the schedule. Vandy on the schedule. Texas A&M, LSU. These are not games that you cannot win. And so I don't want to put the cart before the horse. I'm just here to tell you 6-4 over your final 10 does not sound great, but it would be good enough for John Calipari in Arkansas to get in the NCAA tournament. I'm not saying it will happen, but I do think it possibly could. All right, so what I want to do, I want to take a quick break. Producer Matt, if we have any interesting questions or comments, then we can get to those. But what I want to do is I do want to come back. I do want to talk about some interesting comments from Hubert Davis on Monday night that seemed to indicate big changes coming at North Carolina. So we'll take a quick break, respond to Hubert Davis. If there's an interesting question or two, maybe get to those. Then we got to preview a monster Tuesday night slate. Kentucky-Ole Miss, St. John's hosting Marquette, BYU, Arizona, the late game. Quick break. Be right back. All right, we're going to get back to the show in a minute. But before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what. Do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more. All available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. Mora Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Dion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast. All right, everybody. I'm back. Good to be back. So want to get to some other news and notes from across the world of college sports. But before we do, I want to preview a Monster Tuesday slate too. Really quickly, producer Matt, any interesting questions or comments from the chat? Okay, Luke. This is a doozy. How many teams does the SEC need to advance to the second weekend to prove to the country that this regular season wasn't a fluke after a disappointing showing last year? So it's a great question. Listen, I don't think there's like a very specific number. In other words, like, let me put it like this, is that there's a baseline of like, you can't go 1 for 11 or 1 for 12. But I don't think that, listen, this might be a segment for Wednesday's show. I think Auburn and Alabama are the two best teams in college basketball right now. I don't see any scenario where they don't make the second weekend or beyond. Tennessee, Florida, Kentucky, when they're healthy. I think these are all really good teams. Vandy's good. Missouri's good. Texas can win games. But what I'll say is if somebody, listen, I don't think you get 1 or 2. Now, I remember I'd have to look it up, but I think it was the 2021, the bubble NCAA tournament, where the Big Ten got like 11, I think, not 10 or 11, and they had like 1 in the second weekend. And I remember Purdue lost early that year. Ohio State lost early that year, on and on. So I don't think you go like 1 for 11, 1 for 12. But what I would also say is anybody who says that the regular season was a fluke, all I'd say is go look at the out-of-conference games. Go look at the out-of-conference games. Missouri beat Kansas. Kentucky beat Duke. Kentucky beat Gonzaga. I know Gonzaga's not great, but those are like Duke. Duke might be a 33-2 going into the NCAA tournament. Florida beat Carolina. Tennessee has some good wins. Auburn beat Houston, Iowa State, Memphis, Purdue. So if anybody wants to criticize the SEC if they don't have great tournament success, Like, I don't think this is, I don't think there's a scenario where you could say that they were fluky. Now, I think like in college football, when say, Alabama didn't have great out of conference wins. Ole Miss played nobody in the out of conference. If I remember correctly, South Carolina didn't play anybody in the out of conference. Like basically like SEC football, it feels like was really propped up by, we think they're good because they're the SEC, but we don't have a ton of proof from outside the conference, right? LSU lost to USC in their opener. Texas beat Michigan, but it wasn't a great Michigan team this year. So I think that there was a lot of that. The SEC in basketball, though, again, think about the wins. Go through them. Go through them. Auburn's beating everybody. They beat the two best teams maybe in the Big 12, Iowa State and Houston. They beat the best team in the Big 10 maybe in Purdue. Only losses at Duke in a game that was sort of fluky, if you remember. Kentucky beat Duke. Missouri beat Kansas. I mean, I don't think even if the SEC has kind of a disastrous NCAA tournament, I don't think you can sit there and say it was fluky in any way, shape, or form. By the way, Georgia, who I don't even think is good, they beat St. John's. And we're going to talk about St. John's is a top 15 team in America right now. So I just bring it up to say I don't really think there's a scenario where even if the SEC struggled, you could really say they stink or they were overrated, because we have the proof of concept in the out of conference. And let's be honest, most of those games were on neutral courts, or, some of them were true home road environments, but most of them were on neutral courts. So again, Alabama beats Houston. That's on a neutral court. Auburn beats Houston. That's on a neutral court. Auburn beats Iowa State, neutral court. Auburn beats Purdue, neutral court. Missouri, I believe, won on a neutral. I could be wrong on that. They beat Kansas, though. I do know that. So anyway, could go on and on. Just here to say, I don't think that is really in play, even if the SEC struggle. Know who is struggling right now? Let's go ahead and switch gears, because I do want to talk a little bit about the North Carolina Tar Heels. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into North Carolina. It's kind of funny, right? So Arkansas gets the big win over Kentucky. I was, up until this weekend, calling Arkansas kind of the black cloud of college basketball, where it felt like every time we were talking about them, it was something negative. Well, it feels like that has been the case at North Carolina with Hubert Davis, where there just hasn't been a lot of positive buzz over the last couple weeks, okay? 13-10 right now overall. You're talking about a team that, what are they, 6-4 in the ACC, 6-5, something like that. They get destroyed by Duke. They lost at Wake Forest. They lost to Stanford at home. They struggled against Boston College. There's just not a lot of positive vibes, okay? Same time, we've talked about it, and we've talked about Hubert Davis's future, this, that, the other thing. I don't think today is the day to have the conversation about Hubert Davis's future, other than the fact that we did get some kind of interesting news. On Monday, Hubert Davis had his coaches show, and he kind of made some very interesting comments about the state of the program, about what needs to be fixed. And he did say something interesting that did catch a lot of people's attention during that coaches show. Basically talked about the state of things at North Carolina. And you could see the tweet there available via On3. They paraphrased it. On3 does a great job on social media getting every single piece of news available. But Hubert Davis said on his coaches show on Monday night, the old model for Carolina basketball just doesn't work. It's not sustainable. It has to build out because there's so many things in play with NIL, the transfer portal, agents, international players. You just need a bigger staff to be able to maintain things. You need a bigger staff so I can do what I'm supposed to be doing, and that's coaching. He continued, it's not on the tweet, but he said, I am going to increase the staff, and it's needed. I would have never thought in the 4 years that I took the job 4 years ago that 100% what is needed is a general manager. There's just so much stuff out there. So Hubert Davis basically insinuating, changes need to be made. We've been doing it one way. It is not working. And let me defend Hubert Davis on a few things. Is one, first of all, I think even he knows the standard is not being met at North Carolina. You get to a point where a lot of people, they're just at a job and, they're losing, but they don't really, I don't want to say they don't care, but they kind of give up. Hubert Davis loves Carolina. He wants what's best for Carolina, but I think even he knows that the standard is not being met. 13-10, going to miss the NCAA tournament, very likely for the second time in 3 years. That's not good enough. What I'll also defend Hubert Davis on is the simple fact that I do believe that North Carolina, they're kind of in the dark ages, right? They're a team. I'll be honest. I know this for a fact, and we talked about it with Caleb Wilson. They were very slow to embrace NIL. They were kind of one of those schools. And I remember talking about this years ago, but it felt like when NIL came in, there were kind of those two different types of schools. There were the schools that said, hey, NIL means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Let's just get as much money as we can, give it to as many players as possible, and we'll worry about the consequences later. I would put Miami in that group. I don't believe that Texas A&M ever gave $1 million to each recruit, but you'd probably put Texas A&M in the recruit, the class of like, yeah, they were in on NIL pretty early. Tennessee, very much the same. There were a lot of other schools, though, that were very slow to NIL, that basically said the NCAA has rules. It can't be pay for play. It has to be true NIL, and we're not going to cross that line because we don't know what the consequences are. And they have been playing catch up from there. Kentucky with Mark Stoops and previously John Calipari, they were behind in NIL. I think they would say that, but they basically said, like, look, we don't want the NCAA to retroactively decide that you couldn't just blindly pay players and we get punished for it. I think Alabama with Greg Byrne was kind of in that boat. They were behind on NIL. They thought we had Nick Saban. We're good to go. Da-da-da-da, da-da-da. And then all of a sudden you're way behind. And then all of a sudden you make a coaching change and it's like, oh, crap, we got to catch up. And we've seen the comments from Greg Byrne about we need your money because we're behind. And then there was North Carolina. And again, North Carolina, I don't even fully blame them. And let me explain why. Is because, first of all, you had in the early days of NIL, you did actually have a lot of guys that actually had true marketability, right? Remember, 2021, 2022 was the first year of NIL, the first year where players could make money off their name, image, likeness. Well, Carolina goes to the Final Four that year, plays for a national championship, and returns the whole team. And so Armando Bacot, I remember he was like on Outer Banks or one of those TV shows, and he had a million deals around town. I'm sure Caleb Love at the time, RJ Davis, I'm sure they were all taken care of in true NIL. Like, hey, show up here, we'll pay you, you'll take some pictures, you'll sign some autographs, whatever. So I don't blame North Carolina because I think there was a belief that they were falling, that they could get in trouble. And two, for the most part with basketball, like their players were being taken care of. And then I think the last year, and everybody you talk to in coaching points to the last portal cycle where it was just like, oh, this is way crazier than I thought. And I remember talking to somebody, I won't name the name or the school, but basically, I remember him basically saying like, dude, we had a budget. We thought it's what it was going to be. And it was a good budget, whatever it would have been, $4 or $5 million for the whole team in basketball. And he's like, we weren't even close. And so, producer Matt, I need to take a quick break. I'll be right back, okay? All right, we're going to get back to the show in a minute. But before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what. Do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more. All available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. Mora Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Dion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast. All right, everybody. I'm back. Good to be back. So that was not a Colin Cowherd situation. I'm fine. Just heard some noises in the house that had to be addressed. Everybody is fine. Everybody is safe. But got worried there for half a second. So, by the way, when we post this clip, producer Matt, you're just going to have to edit that out, and we're going to pretend like that never happened. The live people will have seen it. The rest of America will not know. So let's pick it up right where I left off. I'll pause 1, 2, so you'll have a clean, at least, edit on this side. 1, 2. So, yeah. as I was saying, North Carolina was in good position, and then all of a sudden, everything changed last year. So, like I said, let's start from here. As I said, I think people thought they had, I remember talking to an assistant coach, the budget was whatever. Let's just say $5 million. Let's make it nice and even. And they were like, we weren't even close once we actually got into the portal. And so I just bring it up because I don't blame North Carolina for falling behind. Somebody in the chat I saw said North Carolina rested on their laurels. Listen, we got a smart chat, and I appreciate you guys. You're 100% right. I think North Carolina was almost like Alabama football. We're Alabama football. We'll figure this out. People will take the discount to come to Alabama to play football, and I think it's the same with North Carolina. We're North Carolina. We got the baby blue, and we got the Jordan brand behind us, and we're good to go. And I think what they've realized over the last year or so, and I think it really changed like in the last month with the Caleb Wilson stuff, maybe not the last 2 months, is like, you can't just say to a kid, you need to take a discount to come here, because kids aren't going to do it. And so I know they were behind. We've talked about it a million times. I mean, think about all of the things that have happened just in the last year with North Carolina recruiting. Missed out on basically every kid in the portal, Cliff Omiori, Jonas Adu. I can't remember everybody. They missed out. Obviously, AJ DeBonsa. We've talked about it a million times, but remember when the piece came out after AJ DeBonsa committed to BYU, and basically whoever runs his marketing stuff, AJ DeBonsa, they basically said like, yeah, this school was offering this much, that school was offering this much. North Carolina wasn't even close, and they tried to sell us on use the Jordan branding to brand yourself, and you can make money off the court by using North Carolina. And AJ DeBonsa is like, yeah, that's cool, but BYU's offering me this, and Kansas is offering me that. I'm just going to go where I could get the money up front. And so I think things had to change. And I give Hubert Davis credit for acknowledging it. This is a new world. Listen, I don't blame Carolina for being the way that they were, but we're in 2025 now. This thing ain't changing. I know schools will be able to pay players directly, but it doesn't change the fact that, I think Carolina's behind, and I think they got to catch up. I think it's kind of worth noting, and this was kind of an interesting comment by some people that I just saw. Duke was really kind of the first one to really go all in on the idea of having a general manager in college basketball. I mentioned the summer of 2022, North Carolina's coming off a national title game appearance where they lost to Kansas. But what was interesting about that was, if you remember, that was the summer that Jon Scheyer took over for Coach K. Coach K's final game was at the Final Four, lost to North Carolina. And the first thing that Jon Scheyer did, one of the first things, he hired college basketball's first general manager. Rachel Baker from Nike came in and basically handled the day-to-day of NIL. Basically, Jon Scheyer was like, these are the kids that we're recruiting. This is our budget. Find out what they want, and let's make it work. These are the 8 guys that we're focused on in the class of whatever it would have been, 2023, 2024. Figure out what their agents want, and let's see if we can do it or not, because I don't have time to do all of that. And so when I look at the situation in North Carolina, they've fallen behind. They just have, right? Duke's had a general manager for closing in on 3 years now. St. Bonaventure with Woj has a general manager. Villanova has hired a general manager, and they were a place that was never about NIL or pay for play. And they were just like, we got to do this or we're going to fall behind. And so I don't blame Hubert Davis. I give him credit. But I think this is also kind of like you got to get it done now, right? And I think that's my other big picture takeaway from this kind of quote and comment. It sounds like the administration is going to bring him back and is going to give him the resources needed to have the highest level of success. I look at, a million different examples, right, of places where it's not going well. It's not whatever. It's not this. It's not that. And basically a school will basically say, okay, you got this offseason to get it right. Villanova a few years ago had a big NIL budget. It got cut significantly because Kyle Neptune didn't win with it. You go on and on down the list, you can figure out who I'm talking about. But the point I'm trying to make is that it feels like, listen, basically, if North Carolina doesn't make the NCAA tournament, Hubert Davis is basically saying, look, I've got too much on my plate. I shouldn't be, trying to figure out NIL plus fundraising, plus game planning, plus the portal, plus who's entering, plus who's exiting, plus taking care of my own players on campus, plus travel, plus this, plus that. And so I give the Carolina administration credit because it sounds like they are willing to invest in the program the way that they need to. It's a different world. You need more people. I think, Carolina too, That staff has basically been in place for like 10 years. It was basically just they added Hubert Davis, and then really the staff didn't change. And so I think all of those guys, Sean May, who else is on the staff? I'm blanking on everybody on the staff. They were like, oh, this is the way we've always done it, and this is the way we're going to keep doing it. And I think you need new ideas, fresh ideas, and new people, frankly, to take on all the additional responsibility. So on a positive, Hubert Davis is going to get it. I think on a negative for Carolina fans, it certainly sounds like he is going to come back for 2025, 2026. But I'll also say 2025, 2026, you got to get the job done, because if you don't, I don't think you're going to get 2026, 2027 to get it done. So I thought that was a very interesting piece of news that we got over the course of the day. And it'll be interesting to just see kind of what that means going forward for Carolina, because they will be hiring a GM, and it feels like they really do need it. They are struggling right now, and I don't think it's going to get better. All right, I was going to take another quick break, but I think we just got to dive right into the games on Tuesday night. And I'll tell you what, it's going to be a fun Tuesday night of college hoops, okay? Several top 25 matchups, several key matchups. We're starting to get to that point here in the calendar. You know what games matter. You know what games don't. You know what games matter kind of in conference title races, Big East, Big 12, SEC, ACC, whatever. Actually, I don't know if any game counts in the ACC standings. I think Duke's going to win by like 5 games. But anyway, you get the point. Let's preview the Tuesday night games. By the way, we will have a full Aaron Torres pod Wednesday morning reacting to everything. But let's go ahead and jump in. And let's start with the big one. You know, we don't need to beat around the bush. Top 25 matchup in the SEC, which is something we could say literally every single time in SEC. There's SEC basketball games. It feels like there's a top 25 matchup. And so let's go ahead and dive into tonight's game. Of course, it is Tuesday night, ESPN, 7 p.m. Eastern, Kentucky-Ole Miss. What's cool about doing this live, we do have a point spread. Ole Miss is a 4.5-point favorite in this game. The over-under a surprisingly high 157.5, which basically equates to essentially like an 80-78 type game, okay? So in terms of this game, listen, we've talked a lot about Kentucky. They have they've lost 3 of their last 4. That includes a loss to Arkansas at home. It includes a loss to Vandy on the road, and they're banged up. Kirk Reese is out. Lamont Butler's out. Andrew Carr's less than 100%, although Mark Pope did seem to indicate that things are starting to get better with him. So we know what Kentucky's limitations are. The counter to that is, Ole Miss is quietly not playing very good basketball right now either. Remember, this team started 4-0. There was a point where them and Auburn were tied atop the SEC standings, and it's kind of gone sideways from there for Ole Miss. This was a team that was elite defensively. They have not been elite of late. And then, like I said, they have really lost 4 of their last 5 after starting 4-0. Some of them are obviously justifiable. You lose at Auburn, or you lose to Auburn at home this weekend, you can kind of forgive that. But again, 1-4, their last 5, the only win was against Texas at home. It was a close one. They had the meltdown against Texas A&M where they were in control for 39 minutes and 35 or 40 seconds before A&M hit a shot about 10 seconds left to take the lead and win that game. But the big difference for me with Ole Miss over these last couple weeks, I think the variable has been their defense just has not been good enough, okay? This was a team, and we talked about it. They do a great job of forcing turnovers and of not turning the ball over themselves. We don't talk a lot about turnover margin in basketball like we do in football, but this is a team that is one of the elite turnover margin teams. They have they force more turnovers than anybody in the SEC at Ole Miss. Defense simply hasn't been good enough the last 5 games, though. Of those 5 losses, by the way, I should mention of the 4-game win streak to open SEC play, they gave up 66 points or fewer in all 4 games. Basically, we're giving up about 62, 63 points a game. Last 5, they have given up, how about this? In a loss to Mississippi State, admittedly, it was in overtime, they gave up 84. Gave up 83 to Missouri, gave up 92 to Auburn, and have given up more than 70 in 3 of those 5 games after giving up under 70 over the last couple. So just bring it up because the defense has been the difference. Not good for Ole Miss. For Kentucky, we know what the issue is. They just don't have, really a ball handler at this point. And then the defense just hasn't been good enough in their losses, most notably to Vandy when they gave up a ton of points early and fell behind. And then against Arkansas where they gave up 13 3-pointers. And so when I look at this game, listen, I think it's one that could go either way. I think both teams are desperate. I think I think we could see a scenario where it ends up a back and forth game. I think either team can win. I think 4.5 is probably too much. I don't see the scenario where Kentucky gets blown out in this game, but could I see the scenario where it's kind of ugly, where it's kind of choppy? Yeah, I could. I'll take Ole Miss to win this game. You know what my best bet would be though? I would say the under of 157.5. Under 157.5 again insinuates that we're talking about a game that's 80-78 type final score. I don't see that being the case. I think Kentucky with the ball handling struggles, Ole Miss is going to pressure them. Ole Miss wants to play slow. They don't want to get into a game in the 70s or 80s. And I do think we'll see, by the way, a better defensive effort from Kentucky given what we saw on Saturday night at Rupp Arena. So I'll say Ole Miss wins the game 70-68. They keep Kentucky in the 60s, excuse me. And so what is that? 138. I like the under in that game. Really quickly, let's switch gears. How about this? Top 15 matchup at the world's most famous arena, Madison Square Garden, Marquette at St. John's. It is an early 6:30 Eastern time start. St. John's, they are a slight 2.5-point favorite. The over-under set at 147.5. First of all, listen, I know we've talked time and time again about St. John's and just what Pitino has done. And I know at this point there's actual basketball stuff to talk about. It is still pretty freaking insane. Right now, if the season ended today, St. John's would be the Big East regular season champ and have the number 1 seed at the Big East tournament. By the way, I think last March was the first time they had even made Big East Friday night, the 2 semifinal games at the Garden. I think it was the first time they had made the semis since 1999 or 2000 or 2003 or something like that. Well, now they could be the number 1 seed in that tournament when it tips off in about 5 weeks at Madison Square Garden. Thing with St. John's, again, and actually I think Marquette and St. John's are pretty similar in this regard. Kind of play the same way. They want to play fast. They want to put pressure on you. They want to force a lot of turnovers. St. John's actually number 2 in the Big East in turnovers forced, top 10 or so in field goal percentage defense. That is a quintessential Rick Pitino team. They force a lot of turnovers. They put a lot of pressure on you. They make life miserable for you when you have the ball. And then I think the other thing too, they just have great positional size. I know that's not the sexiest thing to talk about here on a podcast, but think it's kind of worth noting that they are a team that, almost how we watched Duke the other day, and you watched Duke and you kind of sat there and said oh, they're just so much bigger than North Carolina. I just don't see the scenario where North Carolina can even run offense. And so they're big positionally. By the way, should mention number 1 in the Big East in rebound margin. So when you force a lot of turnovers, when you play great on defense and you rebound the ball, you're going to have a lot of success. For Marquette, I'll say this is, listen, they lost to UConn the other day. We talked about that game a lot from the UConn perspective. Kind of a fluky win for UConn. And I say this as a UConn guy that, loves my alma mater. But that was a game where UConn finished with 25 turnovers in that game. And it was just a game that it was I don't want to say they had no business winning, but there was a very easy scenario where they could have lost it. Why did UConn win? They made a crap ton of threes, 12 of 19, that's 63%. They held Marquette to under 33% three-point shooting, 7 of 22 overall. And then Marquette missed a ton of free throws, and Marquette got out-rebounded. So on the one hand, it's sort of fluky. On the one hand, it isn't because Marquette forced a million turnovers, but they made fewer threes. They shot a much worse percentage. And they are, by the way, they're an okay three-point shooting team, not a great three-point shooting team, but they are a very good foul shooting team at about 75%. They made 54%. And so I bring it up because it was a little bit fluky. Bring it up to say that, listen, I think Marquette's a really good team. And I don't think that game is a reflection that their season is spiraling out of control. But I'll also say that this is a very tough follow-up for them to play this game after playing UConn on Saturday night. And I will say I do like St. John's to win this game. Bottom line for the Johnnies, listen, I know that they haven't been great at closing out games. I believe they were up, 19 at the half against they were up 19 at the half, I believe, or 19 in the second half, against Providence, needed a buzzer beater to hold on and win. doesn't change the fact that I just think they play a lot like Marquette, only with bigger, stronger, more athletic players. I think St. John's is a bad matchup for Marquette. I think St. John's wins. I'll say 77-70. I think we get a better effort from Marquette, but I do think St. John's wins. Finally, let's get to the last big one. Kind of an interesting matchup. Two teams that we've talked about a lot over the last 2 or 3 weeks because they're both playing really well. Arizona at BYU. BYU is actually a slight favorite in this game. Arizona ranked for the first time. But these are two teams that are really kind of playing their best basketball, okay? Arizona, we talked about on Saturday's show, the craziness with Bobby Hurley didn't take away from the fact that Arizona won another game. And with Houston's loss to Texas Tech, Arizona is now tied atop the Big 12 standings, which is incredible considering, again, they started 4-5 overall. So Arizona's playing really well. We've talked about why. Caleb Love is playing better. I think Tommy Lloyd's kind of figured out some rotational stuff that I won't bore too many people with. But speaking of figure out rotational stuff, I give Kevin Young credit. By the way, BYU fans, I'm going to be at BYU Kansas 2 weeks from today, so I'm excited about that. But I give Kevin Young credit because early on, we know that he kind of sold this NBA model. I come from the NBA, come here, develop. And I think what he's realizing, old college basketball players that might not be great NBA prospects are generally what wins you games. And so I hate to be rude, but, Cannon Catchings moves to the bench. He was a projected one-and-done lottery-type pick. Had a great game against Baylor the other day, but only played 12 minutes against UCF on the road. But I bring it up because the lineup rotations have worked. BYU, as of right now, is basically outside Yegor Demon, who is a surefire lottery pick. They're playing 4 guys that are 4th or 5th year players in college basketball right now. Richie Saunders is playing at an all Big 12 level. Mawat Mag, I think, has been playing, since he's kind of come into the lineup more regularly. He's playing. I think he's brought a new dimension to that team, and they've just kind of ramped up his minutes, and he has been an important piece. So I look at this game. BYU, I mentioned Arizona's won 9 of 10 to open Big 12 play. BYU's quietly won 4 in a row. Now, I think what's interesting is it was kind of a stretch that they kind of had to go 4-0 at Colorado, Cincinnati at home, Baylor at home, UCF on the road. They still have 2 games against Arizona. They still have at Iowa State. They still have Kansas at home. So that was kind of a stretch they needed to go 4-0. I wouldn't say any of those wins were great, but they got the job done. As far as Tuesday night, I think I do like BYU to win this game. Arizona's awesome. It's not a knock on Arizona, but you look at Arizona's road wins, listen, at ASU, okay. At Cincinnati, they're absolutely terrible. They lost to Texas Tech on the road. There is zero shame in that because Texas Tech is awesome. They also won at Oklahoma State. So you're talking about winning against 3 of the 4 worst teams in the league. Those are your 3 road wins. They did win at Arizona as well. So 4 road wins so far, all against the bottom half of the league. I think it's a tough spot. I think it's at altitude. I think BYU is playing better. I will take BYU to win the game. All right, really quickly before we get out of here, producer Matt, any questions? By the way, let me get to this one really quick. I just want to say, G says, and it's in reference to St. John's because Rick Pitino has a game, but he said, every time I watch New Mexico, they win, LOL. And he said also, Rick and his son are doing really good. I'll tell you this, my buddy Nick Cope from Fox Sports was on the call of the New Mexico-Utah State game the other night. I won't get too, in the weeds on it. New Mexico, by the way, has a big game against Colorado State on Wednesday night. Those are 2 NCAA tournament caliber teams. I think New Mexico is like one of the 25 best teams I've seen in college basketball. Donovan Dent should be an All-American consideration. I like the big guys, Nelly Jr. Joseph, who played for Rick Pitino at Iona previously, True Washington. So I don't know how much New Mexico love we give on this show, but they are playing really well. And with that said, producer Matt, any other interesting questions before we get out of here? Let's see here. Do you think SEC coaches of non-bubble teams subconsciously would rather lose early in the SEC tournament to get more rest? Selection Sunday games don't matter. Auburn last year got sent to Spokane as a 4 seed. So first of all, I know that Calipari can do no right in the eyes of Kentucky fans, but what I will tell you is that he was always right about this. Basically, if you won or if you lost in the SEC tournament, it had zero bearing on your NCAA. If you lost or won in the SEC tournament on the final day, it had zero bearing on the selection committee. Okay. And I've argued this for years. You go back to, remember, what was it, 3 years ago? I think it was 2022. 3 years ago, basically, if you remember, it was Tennessee against Texas A&M. Tennessee was playing as good as anybody during the 2022 season. Texas A&M was squarely on the bubble, got all the way to the championship game. And most people assumed when they won in the semifinal that it was going to be enough to get them into the NCAA tournament. They end up losing on the final day. Tennessee wins. Tennessee was basically down a seed line from where they should be. Texas A&M did not get into the NCAA tournament. Buzz Williams went on like an insane 8-minute rant the next day. But it proved that the SEC championship game does not matter in the eyes of the selection committee. They put together the bracket before that game is even played. And so I will tell you this, Luke, I actually agree with you, is one, and I've said this, Greg Sankey is the most powerful person in college sports. And I would fight this harder. I would basically say, if you're not even going to acknowledge my teams, then we're playing our championship game on Saturday. If you're not going to consider what happens in the SEC championship game at all, why am I going to punish my teams? We'll start the tournament a day earlier. We'll end a day earlier, and we'll give you plenty of time to seed them properly. But for ESPN, they want that game on Selection Sunday. We understand that. But there has to be wins. There has to be positive consequences for the winner, and frankly, positive consequences for the team that gets there. And so to answer your question, listen, I don't think anybody wants to go one and done in a conference tournament, because I think you want to have a little bit of momentum going into Selection Sunday. And but I think there's the counter to it as well. 3 games in 3 days, 4 games in 4 days. It's kind of a lot. That was another knock on Calipari. Didn't like conference tournaments. He basically said, like, look, we're not playing 3 games in 3 days in the NCAA tournament, so why should we play 3 games in 3 days here in Nashville? Not about Calipari. I do agree with your broader point, is that I think there's a lot of coaches, they wouldn't publicly admit it, but if they lost in the semifinals and they got that extra day of rest, they could get out Saturday afternoon, get home, get rested, have an off day on Sunday before they start preparing. Because again, you play on Thursday, you're leaving campus on Tuesday or Wednesday. I think there might be something to that. Kurt Stamper says, Arkansas is better without Boogie Fland. He was a good player, but a bad fit. I've seen some of this going around. I don't know that I have a strong enough opinion on this yet. I think we got to see. I'm generally not in favor of, I'm not in favor of eliminating good players who are going to be first round draft picks. But what I will say, I thought the roles were so clearly defined on Saturday against Kentucky. DJ is going to be handling the ball. Janelle Davis is going to be the number one scoring option. Carter Knox. And one thing I will say, since I'm critical, since I've praised Cal, one thing I think it is fair to be critical of. I think when he has too many guys, he basically just pulls guys the second they do something dumb. And I know that was a frustration with Arizona or with Arkansas or with Kentucky fans. Excuse me. I have Arizona on my screen. I apologize. But I think that was a criticism of Kentucky fans. It's like, dude, the kid took one bad shot. The kid missed one box out. You can't take out your best players every time something bad happens. And so I think with a player like Carter Knox or Billy Richmond or DJ Wagner or whoever, it's Big Z is probably the best example. It's like now you're down to 8 dudes. And you can't just pull a guy if they screw up one time. You got to ride with Carter Knox. You got to ride with a Big Z. And so I think there is something to a smaller rotation for Cal maybe is better. I don't know if they're technically better without Boogie Fland. I'll have to, really dive into that one a little bit deeper. But I think there is something to, like, maybe, just maybe, having fewer playable players is actually a good thing for Cal. We'll see about that. All right. I think that might be it for today's episode of the Aaron Torres Pod. Tell you what, by the way, I just had somebody comment on one of my Kentucky videos. Keep throwing dirt on us, Torres. Don't think I'm throwing dirt on anybody, but I'll tell you what. I think it is time for me to get out of here. If you're not subscribed to the show, please make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, wherever you listen to podcasts, please make sure to subscribe. Also, make sure to rate and review the show. Go ahead, give us a quick 5 stars. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, all that good stuff. Make sure you're following on social media at Aaron_Torres on Twitter, at Aaron Torres Pod on Instagram, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com. That is all for today's show. But here's the good news. We're going to have a lot to react to. We'll be back Wednesday morning. How about 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 Pacific? Torres is going to get up early. Torres is going to crank out some notes, and we are going to rock and roll and get ready for a reaction to a busy Tuesday night. Appreciate your support. We'll be back on Wednesday.